Okay. So I'm going to gabble us in. I'm calling this hearing to an order. For the record, my name is Julia Mejia. I'm a city councilor at large. I'm also the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Small Business and Workforce Development, as well as the lead sponsor. In order of recognition, I also would like to know that we've been joined by at-large City Councilor Flaherty. And I will continue to announce my other colleagues as they come on. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. This public hearing is being recorded and is being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Files Channel 964. If you wish to testify via video conference, please email michelle.a.goldberg@boston.gov to sign up. When you are called, please state your name and affiliation, residency, and limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes to ensure that all comments can be heard. You may also submit written testimony by emailing ccc.sbwd@boston.gov. Today's hearing is on docket 0215, order for a hearing discussing commercial vacancies in Boston. Our expected speakers today include from the administration is Natalia Uberte, who is the Director of Small Business, Nicholas Arnello, Commissioner Assessing Department. And our advocates is Darrell Weathers, Voices of Liberation, Jacob Lee DeFore, Community Activist, Priya Lane Bizgrow, Director, Lawyers for Civil Rights, Gina Collier, Executive Director of the Collier Connection. And I also believe we have someone from BECMA who will be joining us as well. I would like to begin with my own opening remarks, and then I would love to just quickly transition over to my colleagues. So this is a hearing order that was designed entirely by the community. We have had the pleasure of working with Darrell and Jacob, both who are serving as panelists in this morning's hearing. They approached our office because they were passionate about something that we all have been seeing going on across the city. It feels like every year, more and more storefronts are empty along our streets, especially since the start of the pandemic. We have even seen storefronts become, I just want to make sure, can you all hear and see me? Okay.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can, Council.
Okay, great. I thought my internet said was unstable. It feels like every year, more and more storefronts are empty along our streets, especially since the start of the pandemic. We have seen even more storefronts become vacant. A recent study report in WBUR found that 60 to 80% of commercial lenders are tightening their purse strings when it comes to handing out money for small business loans. So we're in a situation where it's incredibly hard for people to access brick and mortar storefronts. We know what the problem is, and we have the opportunity in this hearing to talk about what solutions to this problem could look like. I look forward to hearing from our panelists and to working alongside everyone towards finding a solution. I believe that we also have been joined by Councilor at Large Anissa Sapi-George, as well as Councilor Ed Flynn from District 2. Would love to give you all an opportunity in the order of arrival to say hello. So I'd like to ask my colleague, Councilor Flaherty, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also for hosting and for sponsoring. Very timely, just given everything that's going on throughout the pandemic, and even as we head into what most are forecasting is a recession. So obviously our business community, particularly our commercial stakeholders, are key to this discussion. as they're levied. I think arguably it's probably the highest they've ever been levied at a time, obviously, when we're seeing our residential property tax go up. So we obviously need to reach out to our commercial landlords as well as our commercial tenants to see what we can do to help them. One, have their businesses survive, both big and small, but also help those landlords as well, who for most of them they've been going without a rent for over a year. So also want to note that Commissioner Nick, Arnello, and Natalia, they've been super responsive throughout the entire pandemic. So I want to commend them on behalf of all of us here at the council. A day doesn't go by when me and my staff are not on the phone with either Nick or Natalia to help small local businesses or our residents who are feeling the crunch with the increased tax levy. So that said, look forward to hearing from those that know this issue well, and let's work together to try to find a solution as their Boston City Council. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor, I order of arrival. Councillor Sabi George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as Councillor Flaherty mentioned, as you've mentioned, and I'm sure others will, our small business districts are the heart and soul of many of our neighborhoods, and what really contribute and create our neighborhoods, certainly in addition to our residents. So just grateful for the opportunity to understand sort of the deeper impact of vacancy rates across our city and in our business districts, and look forward to today's conversation. I will ask or apologize ahead of time. I will dip out for a little bit and rejoin the meeting after another commitment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and thank you to Nick and Natalia for the great work they've been doing, especially over the last year during this pandemic. Not an easy task, but they've been very professional and representing the city well. Had the opportunity yesterday to visit some small businesses in the South End, Chinatown, and South Boston. And certainly our business districts, small businesses are struggling, and we want to see what we can do to be helpful to them. Many women-owned businesses, many immigrant-owned businesses as well. But as Councilor Sabi George mentioned, and Councilor Flaherty did as well, they play a critical role in our neighborhoods. And one of the small business owners I talked to yesterday was actually volunteering, serving lunches for seniors. Even though it's during a difficult time, she was out helping people. So they're the backbone of our neighborhoods, and they play a critical role, and we want to do everything we can to be helpful to them. Councilor Mejia, thank you for calling this, and thank you for your leadership on this important issue as well.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I know that some folks have a time commitment. I'm going to just shake things up a little bit. I'm going to be super mindful of the administration. I do know that we have Gina Collier, who also has a hard stop at 10:30. So I'm hoping we can lead with Sheena from Boston While Black, and who has been doing a lot of work with entrepreneurs in the city of Boston. So if you don't mind, to the administration, I'm gonna just lead with her. So I think that there might be an opportunity for some questions that you may want to Natalia, then I'll go next to you, because I think that it could be a really good, robust dialogue between you both while we have you both here. Is that okay? Yeah. So Gina Collier, you now have the floor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and to the Boston City Council for having this conversation. As Councilor Mejia mentioned, my name is Gina Collier. I'm the founder and CEO of the Collier Connection, as well as Boston While Black. And for those who I'm not familiar with, have been in Boston almost 2 decades, and a lot of what I've done over the last, particularly 15 years, is really helping to create more spaces of belonging for professionals around the city, entrepreneurs, particularly Black professionals and entrepreneurs. I've also worked through working at Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative many years ago, as well as the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, have worked with many businesses owned by people of color, and have been building my own businesses for more than 5 years. Throughout my journey supporting businesses and growing my own, the issue of space is a recurring issue. You know, who has access who can afford to be in what neighborhoods and how this impacts what our neighborhoods look like and feel like, where people feel like they do and don't belong. And then of course, longer term issues around generational wealth building and just how we can utilize and leverage space as a way for people to build wealth in the city. And so unfortunately with COVID, we all know that a lot of spaces have become vacant. Even pre-COVID, there have been issues in the city around who can afford to be where, and this has just exacerbated it. But I'm hoping that the city council really takes this as an opportunity to reimagine and rebuild and really rethink who can be in these spaces, and particularly how can the city provide support to really building out districts in neighborhoods that are vibrant and have people from all backgrounds who are able to run their businesses there. And so I'm really interested in working with you all, and learning more about how we can put policies and practices into place that are giving all small businesses, businesses owned by people of color in particular, the opportunity to be in spaces, afford spaces that they haven't been able to in the past.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheena, for that. I know we have you until 10:30, so don't go away. I'm going to ask Natalia. I know you are also on a time crunch. Would love to offer you an opportunity to have some remarks, and then would love to seize the next 15 minutes to kind of do a round of questions with you both, just in the spirit of keeping the conversation moving.
Yes, thank you so much. And always great to see Sheena on a panel. I love the work that Sheena's been doing, and I'm proud to have her here. So just very quickly, I'm going to run through some of the things that the city's been doing, that our team's been doing. I want to note that this has been a topic of conversation for us for years, pre-pandemic, and obviously the pandemic has created a space for additional risk for our small businesses, in particular, as we think about commercial vacancies, obviously. I want to just note that Nick is here to answer any questions that might come up from the panel, but I will be presenting on behalf of the City of Boston. So I'm just going to share my screen if that's okay. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. So I just want to start off by saying, obviously, small businesses in the city of Boston are the backbone and the heart of our neighborhood commercial districts, but also of our economy. When we think about Boston's small business landscape, we know that there are about 40,000 small businesses that create $15 billion in revenue, of which 37% of that revenue is private for-profit businesses. Of those, 170,000 jobs, and of those, 44% of those jobs are in our private sector. Those 170,000 jobs, we also know that in our small commercial districts, they are hiring our local community members. So small businesses go beyond just having jobs, but they really extend to ensuring that our communities have great jobs in their communities and can invest those dollars directly into the community. So I just want to talk about citywide vacancy rates. I also will note later in the conversation that these rates are very difficult to measure. So the city of Boston has asked the Boston Planning and Development Agency, the BPDA, to help us with some of this research data. As you can see here, citywide office vacancy rate is 9.9%. So that's that blue line that you've seen gone up during the pandemic. And the retail vacancy rate is 2.6% as of March 9th, 2021. So and that's that red line. As you can see, the retail vacancy rate, so that is mostly what we see in our neighborhood commercial districts, is actually still pretty consistent throughout the pandemic and throughout the last couple of years. What we've seen happen here is obviously with the stay-at-home order and COVID-19, we've seen offices really be mostly impacted by this pandemic. As you can see here, of the retail vacancy rates, we're by neighborhood. We can see that the Boston total, sorry, I can't see all of the screen. Sorry, guys. All right, the orange you see here is Q4 for 2019, so just before the pandemic hit, and Q4 with 2020. So these are a comparison. So in 2020, the total retail vacancy rate by neighborhood has gone up about half of a percent. And as you can see, the difference in the neighborhoods specific data. So we've seen obviously increased vacancy rates in South Boston and the waterfront, as well as in downtown Boston, which again is really tied to kind of the office and employment data of people working from home and not being downtown. So that all of these numbers make, very logical sense based on COVID-19. So the City of Boston, with our partnership with the Boston Main Streets, we actually collect data from Main Streets on a monthly basis. So what you're seeing here is the difference between the years in vacancy rates. So as you can see here, the average obviously is that big chunky blue line, and you can see the different colors. I'm sorry if this is hard to read. I'm happy to share this with folks later. But we actually see, if you can see here, this is the 2020 number versus the 2017 number. So we have seen some decrease in the vacancy rate, but again, this is self-reported data, so it is not super easy to measure. This is what the Main Street directors are reporting to the city on a monthly basis. So some of the challenges with data include, like I just mentioned, the Boston Main Streets data is based on what the directors know. And during 2020, it was really hard to connect with business owners as well as landlords during the initial phases of COVID-19. And so we don't have 100%. We can't say that data is 100% accurate, but it is reflective of what we're seeing kind of as you walk through the neighborhood, which shutters are closed, what doors are locked, what lights are off, etc. Assessing does not capture lease information, so it's really hard for us to actually know whether a space is actually vacant or if it's just not being utilized. So the idea of a landlord having a space leased out but maybe not occupied maybe is one of the barriers to getting accurate data. And the other thing is leases are obviously private contracts. It's really challenging for the City of Boston to get a lot of details around leases and around information that is, part of a private contract between two entities, the landlord and the business owner. Another challenge is long-term vacancies pre-COVID. We've seen across the city, there are some spaces that just have never been fully occupied or are occupied but not accessible. This is something that we'll discuss in a little bit. The other thing we don't quite know yet from COVID-19 and the impacts of COVID-19 is what are new actual vacancies versus businesses that are in hibernation. We know that a lot of businesses have shut down temporarily. They may have long-term leases and have been able to cover their leases, but maybe are just not open. So we don't actually know with real certainty where all of these vacancies actually are. We do know that some businesses have closed, but we don't know whether or not they've terminated their lease and that space will be vacant and available for a new business, or if they're hanging it onto that space so that they could potentially reopen or start a new business. We don't have that information to date. But I do want to talk a little bit about what we do in our office in order to support businesses, in particular around this idea of vacancies and filling those vacancies, as well as general support for businesses looking to expand into commercial space. So first and foremost, we offer technical assistance to businesses. We have a wide range of experts that we pair a business up with for one-on-one free support to the business. This includes everything from planning for growth, customer acquisition and retention, marketing and branding, improving the customer experience, financial management, and lease and legal guidance. Over the last 2.5 years since I've been in this role, we have also expanded to include helping businesses with lease negotiations, as well as helping businesses put together, content for potential lease applications. So as spaces become vacant or are vacant and looking for tenants, we help businesses prepare to be a competitive applicant for those spaces. We also work really closely with businesses for signage and facade improvements. So anytime a new business goes into one of those vacant spaces, we want to help them get signage. As you can see in this picture, this is Nos Casa in Roxbury, one of the signage projects of 2019. It's obviously very beautiful, but it helped them obviously get started and opened up. We also do facade improvement projects with partnership with the landlords and property owners. So, if someone wants to improve the front of their building, the city does offer grants to businesses looking to do those kind of bigger construction projects. Our Economic Development Center launched in 2019. And we've done workshops on a variety of different resources for businesses around expansion and growth. The Starting Your Business 3-part workshop series that you see here is the one that's coming up next week, starting next Wednesday for the 3 following weeks for new businesses. However, in the past, we've done workshops around how do you find the right space, how do you negotiate a lease, how do you build that business plan, et cetera, in order to be able to expand into these new spaces. Anyone interested in these workshops, they're absolutely free. You do need to register, and you can do that for this one in particular at bit.ly/bossbiz101, or you can go to boston.gov/small-business and find out all about the workshops that are upcoming in the next, couple months.
Yeah, Natalia, I'm sorry. I just want to be mindful of time. I know that
I'm almost finished.
Yeah, just because
Yep.
I want to be sure that you seize the moment while we still
Absolutely.
have here. So
Thank you, Counselor. I'll be quick. Pre-COVID, we held several vacancy fairs to create a pipeline of businesses and connecting them directly to property managers. As you can see here, in May of 2019, we held our first fair. 2020 was canceled, and we are planning one for 2021. Again, I think one of the biggest issues in filling commercial vacancies is making sure that businesses have access to the property managers, and oftentimes property managers don't have access to the actual businesses. So by doing events like this, it can help us really get those spaces filled. Also want to just talk about some ways in which we're using vacancies in creative ways. We're looking for partnerships always. There's a great organization called Spacious that actually takes vacant spaces and activates them in different ways. You can see here a picture of the Rosendale substation and what it is now that got activated through a partnership. We're also doing, different types of art installations and pop-ups for vacancies to ensure that we're not just letting those spaces sit there and be idle. I want to just remind folks about resources through our small business conference call every Tuesday at 3. You can join us at bit.ly.com/smallbizboss. This call is in multiple languages, and we encourage folks to join in. But finally, what I really wanted to talk about was our COVID-19 response to commercial vacancies and potential displacements. We put out the Commercial Rent Relief Fund this past November. To date, we've funded 352 businesses at over $3.4 million. Of those, 58% were minority owned, 44% were woman owned, and 57% were immigrant owned. And you can see how those, how the distribution of those funds have been executed across the city. Some of the program highlights where I think
Okay, I'm sorry, because I mentioned that Sheena has to leave at 10:30, and I just really want to be super mindful of the time, and
problem.
I really do appreciate all of the in-depth work that you're showcasing and all the work that you all have been doing. But
Yep,
I really
that was the last slide, Counselor. Go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry. I'm trying to be really respectful of everyone's time, and we went on 15 minutes where normally it's like 5. So we're trying to be super generous here. But I do want to make sure that while we have Sheena, we can utilize this moment to get some input and some feedback and some questions. Sheena, I'm just curious, based on the report that you just saw, can you just talk to me a little bit about some of the things that you've been hearing from those that you serve, and more specifically, have any of your members taken part of some of these workshops, and what can we do better as a city to kind of connect people to those resources?
Yeah, and just on time, I can stay on another 15 minutes or so. So, well, one, I'll just say for myself as a business owner, I did, Natalia's been great. And even, I was able to get support from the city early on in the pandemic to be able to more broadly, I don't have a physical space yet, but being able to just kind of get support as far as just a business owner that's serving Boston. And there's a number of other folks that I interact with that were able to as well, and found the process easy to navigate. I think particularly on the space side of things, one of the things that Natalia mentioned, well, it actually brought up a question for me around how can we, and I just mean like we as a city or even business owners, help with on the data collection side, and helping to get a more accurate picture. The challenges, Natalia, that you mentioned make a lot of sense as far as, my limited knowledge of main streets. I know every neighborhood operates differently, and, people have different information and access in different ways. So, what can we do as a city and utilizing other business owners to help you all with getting, I guess, like more accurate numbers, for folks like me that have groups of people that we convene? Are there things that we can send off on your behalf to be able to help to fill in some of those gaps? I think for the space activation piece that you were starting to mention towards the end, there's been a lot of, even pre-COVID, I think because of all the development happening in the city, and particularly developers knowing that they need to do some around community benefits. And I was getting a lot of calls myself around bringing some of my events into some spaces and just helping to activate those spaces. And I think all of that is great. The part that was missing, and not necessarily what the city is doing, but it might be, I don't know it as well. It's like, how does that translate? How can that then translate to me actually having a space, or to others having a space? A lot of that kind of stuff is temporary, and I think even sometimes, even recently, I was talking to someone about a space where they did do that with some artists and with some business owners, but they didn't have in mind that those people were going to be there long term, and they kind of utilized it as a holdover until they really figured out what they wanted to do with that space. So, how, while spaces are being activated so that there's not kind of an eyesore of vacancies, how do you also utilize that to get people to actually be the renters or owners of those spaces, as you're using that as a transition. The other slide that you showed around the neighborhoods, the graphs that showed the different years of around vacancies. I actually had a question. I was interested in why it was higher previous years. Like you saw, like areas like Grove Hall, where 2017 it was actually more vacancies than now. And I don't know if that's just about the amount of businesses there are now, or the amount of space that there is now. But again, how can we as a community and a city really work to almost do, and this is, I'm saying this knowing that the city does some of this, but I don't have time to edit myself. So, you know, how can we do more mapping of like what we want those neighborhoods to look like, and then find the business owners to go into those spaces. I think that there's, I'll just speak for folks that I know, you know, a lot of us are too small maybe to have our own spaces, but we have examples of kind of incubator spaces or shared workspaces that are happening around the city. How can we do more of that as a way to get people's foot in the door and give them the opportunity to have, you know, whether it's office space or other kind of maker space, as we as a city continue to build out, you know, kind of bigger plans of what we want the city to look like. Lastly, I'll say, you know, this hasn't come up yet, but what I've seen over the years, one of the barriers around all of this, I mean, obvious rent is obvious. So aside from that, I think is speaking from folks that do events or trying to bring people together, just stuff like how is this all connected to permitting and just other city processes that make it really hard for people to even pop up in spaces or kind of navigate around the city. And that's what I've seen a lot of. People don't, there's these kind of arduous processes that people aren't sure how to navigate, which I know you all know very well. And so how is that related to these vacancies? You know, how is it related to kind of like how people are and aren't moving around the city? There's obviously a lot of opportunity right now in the Seaport in those areas. And so while we're talking about what's going on in the neighborhoods, you know, how are we also moving people into those, you know, vacant spaces that these bigger corporations are leaving vacant as well?
So I'm glad that I led with Sheena, because you covered a lot of the questions that I had too. And one in particular is really about making sure that when we're thinking about creating opportunities for small minority businesses, that we're not just regulated to Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, and that we're looking at how we can occupy space on Newberry Street, Faneuil Hall, and other parts of the city where the dollar is circulating. So would love to get some insight in terms of kind of the work that Natalia, you and your team are doing to address some of the things that Sheena mentioned, but I also really kind of want to double down on some of the stuff around access to storefronts across the city of Boston, not just in distressed neighborhoods.
Yeah, and thank you for those questions, Sheena. So I'll start by kind of just framing a little bit of the data piece. So the state of Massachusetts requires businesses with 50 or more employees to report data to the state that they've closed, for example. So that's where a lot of these you know, issues lie, is that do we require, you know, how does the city then require people to report data, right? And how do you hold them accountable? So there's a lot to be said there. We did put out on our webpage and through our small business calls, a request for, you know, to know whether or not businesses have closed. Again, that does not mean that their lease has been terminated or that they no longer have a legal right to that space, right? Especially if they've paid or they continue to pay. So knowing the difference between a vacant space that is like available by a landlord to lease out versus something that just looks vacant is a challenge, right? It is definitely something that I'm eager to figure out to how to get better data on, but I'm not sure that necessarily that we have any system set up to actually capture that, because obviously if the property is being taken care of and managed by a property owner or a landlord and is paying taxes and all of that, we'll know later if a space becomes vacant, but usually you don't know that information on the day-to-day. I want to touch on a little bit of the relationship between the city and what our role is in getting those spaces filled. So we work with the Main Street districts, and as you all know, there is not a Main Street district in every neighborhood in the city of Boston, and we are doing a Reimagine Main Streets conversation and initiative right now to help identify where else maybe there need to be Main Streets and what that might look like. But we work with all Main Streets and the community. And as you all know, if a business is going into a space, it is the community tends to have a big voice there, and we love that because it helps us make sure that we don't have too many nail salons or too many barber shops or not enough of, you know, something or the other in any one neighborhood. It's really important to have that good mix of businesses across the city, and we really rely on the community to help us shape that, right? I'm not sure it's the city's job to say, you know, 4 is too many nail salons, right? I think it's more of what does the community want in their commercial spaces and their commercial neighborhood areas. So we rely on that relationship. And, you know, I think advocates have a huge role to play in making sure that the spaces are mixed in great ways. And almost always those require community processes, especially if there's a change of use in the zoning. I think going to your other questions around capturing this data, I would absolutely love information and help from any of the advocates and any of your networks, Sheena, and others on the call, to help us think through what it looks like to actually measure those vacancies. I think as far as these programs go and as far as helping people actually get into those spaces, I think having a programmatic element to any vacant space, I think is a private deal. I think how do we work with, you know, folks like you to help you get connected to those spaces. We don't always have landlord or property manager information readily available, or, you know, they're not always super responsive to, you know, these types of efforts. So we do everything that we can to ensure that we can make those connections to spaces for businesses, because again, these are private deals that the city of Boston does not regulate. We don't regulate who a private property owner leases to. We can help make introductions and we can help prepare businesses for those conversations. But at the end of the day, we don't control how those contracts are built.
Okay, so I'm going to, I'm gonna keep saying time and I'm gonna manage my own time here. I think we've gone on a little bit longer than what I anticipated for my round. I wanna give my colleagues an opportunity to ask questions to either Sheena or Natalia while we still have them both here. And I also wanted to acknowledge that we've also been joined by Councillor Braden and Councillor Bach as well. So just wanted to acknowledge your presence, and we'll be kicking it over to you all. I wanted to, I'm trying to look at my speaker view here. I see Natalia on my screen here. I'm wondering if my colleagues have any questions. I'll just go really quickly. Councillor Flaherty, if you are here and still have any questions. Councillor Flynn, I know Councillor Sabi George said that she would be.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, thank you for the. Thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously thank you for the presentation there from Natalie. Very thorough, and maybe just I guess I'll offer a comment in that, you know, our local Main Streets districts, our small local business leaders, as well as Greater Boston Real Estate Board, they've all been very helpful throughout this pandemic, and I know that that's also the role that the Boston City Council plays. I know that I've worked with a number of my colleagues over the years, helping small businesses just navigate the myriad of different permits and licenses that are needed, due to sort of public safety and public health needs. So, and we also need to work with local communities just to make sure that we, have a diversity of businesses. It's no good when you have, your local Main Street just has, hair and nail salons and pizza places. We need to make sure that we have other services that obviously make our local business districts work and that they feed off each other. And we've also worked closely with our local community health centers. It always seems that wherever there's a local community health center, the small local businesses all around that community health center prosper. And so that's the sandwich shops, et cetera. It's the pharmacies. So again, just being strategic, I guess, about that business, where they want to locate, and, working with your local elected official, working with folks like Natalia and her team, and the Main Streets District, I think will go a long way to help. And that's kind of what we do. I know I do, and my staff does it regularly. I know I work with colleagues doing it, that going through that, the process of just opening up those doors, letting them know who to call, calling on their behalf. Those are things that I think that, that's why we get elected to the Boston City Council, to help people navigate the bureaucracy and to be helpful as any way we can. So to the folks that are on this line that are interested in either opening a small business or trying to keep their small business in their neighborhood, feel free to call my office or any of my colleagues' office, because that's what we do as your Boston City Councilors.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flynn, any questions or comments that you'd like to share? Then I'd like to invite Councilor Bach, followed by Councilor Breeden.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I just want to say thank you to both Natalia and Gina for their testimony, for their leadership, and working together. I think that's what we need going forward, is continuing that, developing those partnerships, ongoing communication, and making sure that our small businesses continue to play a critical role in our neighborhoods. Just wondering, going forward, Natalia, if there's anything as we approach the city budget discussion, is there anything that us city councilors can do to advocate for more funding for small businesses in our neighborhoods, especially businesses that are struggling right now and on the verge of, unfortunately, of collapsing? But what could the city council do in advocating for more funding for any of your programs?
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I really appreciate that question. So, I mean, I think for us, it's always about building capacity, you know, for our team. The Commercial Rent Relief Fund was a tremendous success, and we're hoping to see the long-term effects of that fund. One of the elements that I didn't get to share is just that fund creates a contract between landlord and businesses in a way that helps prevent displacement, which I think is really important. So obviously, as we think about moving forward, you know, what do supports like that look like? I think for me, you know, I'd love to see expanded capacity on my team in order to be able to serve additional businesses and really think about these things more deeply. We have an incredible team in the Office of Economic Development that is thinking about policy on a regular basis, where we will be expanding kind of the thought around these big policy issues. And we will hopefully be able to make an ask of the City Council in the coming years.
Thank you for that. Councilor Flynn, do you have any other questions?
No, I just want to say that was a great answer. Thank you for that information. Also, we might want to sometime over the next month or so check in, if there's a working session, check in with Sheila Dillon at D&D, because I know there's some options that department might have as well. I've worked with them in the past on small business related issues. Again, thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Councilor Mejia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to go next to Councilor Bach for questions to either Sheena or Natalia, and then Councilor Breeden, and then I'm going to open up to the next.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And thank you, Natalia and Commissioner Arnello and Sheena, all for being here. I had a couple of questions on this. One was, Natalia, I know you mentioned that we don't really have the data on what's a real vacancy. And I know that, you know, obviously Nick's department assessing interacts with the owners of buildings rather than necessarily the lessees. I wondered what work you guys have done in partnering with like BPDA research around, like, for instance, point of sale data. Because I think that, you know, there's quite a lot of research data out there about, you know, where transactions are happening. And basically, like, if a point of sale has stopped doing any transactions, like, that might give us a more accurate heat map of where the real vacancies are in the city. And especially I'm thinking about in the moment of reopening, because I tend to agree with you that my greatest fear is that there's a bunch of businesses that we've all been assuming are temporarily closed, that everyone is about to find out are closed. But you couldn't tell the difference from the transaction data today, but you might be able to tell the difference in a couple of months. And so I was wondering if you've looked at that much. And then my tail onto that might be a Commissioner Arnello question. is, Commissioner, I know that you guys get private lease details in order to do property tax assessment on the commercial side, which by law you're not allowed to share with the council or the public or anyone. But I wonder if is there any way to use that data in the aggregate to give us a picture of like where we're at and what happens? Like if somebody gave you their lease details and then you've set their property taxes and then they lose their lessees and they aren't getting any lessees, like is there a moment where commercial folks reach out to you in a hope that it's going to affect their property taxes, or does that not really matter because it's just the last lease on file that sort of sets the baseline? So those are two questions, one for each of you, but kind of related to establishing what's really going on in vacancies.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. I'll be quick. So we do work with the BPDA every day. They actually helped us pull the information for this particular council hearing. So I don't know if they have POS data, but I know that there is cell data that we've used to kind of track the movement of tourism and, residents, et cetera, across the city during the pandemic. So it might be interesting to see if we can create some clarity there. So I will reach out to the BPDA about that piece in particular around POS data.
Awesome. And Nick?
Good morning, Councilor. For the record, it's Nick Arnello from the City of Boston.
Can you talk a little bit louder, Nick? We can't hear you that.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Much better.
All right.
Good job.
Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Nick Arnello, the Commissioner of Assessing for the City of Boston. Thank you for your question, Councilor Bach. So assessing data, we do have data. It's a little complicated for the kind of issue that we're talking about today, because really when you guys are talking about vacancy, you're talking about vacancy right now, right? And what's about to become vacant. The data requests that we send out are always backwards looking. And so right now we're just sending out requests about vacancy data from last calendar year. And we will get that data and start to process it and have an idea of what that kind of looks like by the summer. So even once we have that aggregate data, which we might be able to discuss, it's not going to give you a good picture of what's actively happening in that moment. It'll be like, hey, we just figured out what happened a year ago. And it's highly dependent on response rates and things of that nature. So it makes it a little tricky to kind of use that as the kind of tool that you're talking about. It still can probably have some, it's not going to have that value for those kind of quick transitions, right? In terms of like, restaurants that we think are going to come back, but turns out that they left. But for the most part, if you're talking about office leases, a lot of those are longer term leases. And so you can kind of get a vacancy data from last year from an office perspective can still be useful in terms of current vacancy, because when you're talking about businesses that have 5-year leases instead of 1 or 2-year leases, it's a lot of this also gets a little bit into the problem that Natalia was talking about, where you can have something that looks vacant, and as far as assessing is concerned, it's not economically vacant because someone's still paying rent. And that happens a lot. You also have, if a building is resetting, that's not really vacancy, because that's not that they aren't able to get a tenant. That's they're doing work to try and make the space more attractive for a different type of tenant. So they can generate new rents. And so that gets tricky. In terms of what we value, we're not allowed to value property based on what is actually in that space at any given point in time. So for commercial space, we're always supposed to value it based on this kind of hypothetical, what would that space have generated in rent if it were using current market rents for the value time that we're looking at. So basically what that means is we don't tend to use actual vacancy when we're valuing something the same way we don't use actual income generated. We use kind of an estimate of what, if something were leased out at market rates, what would that income be? What is a normal expense ratio, what is a normal vacancy rate for something that has achieved stabilization. So to the extent that we usually give something an above and beyond vacancy discount, it's because something dramatic happened. Either it's a brand new building that we're giving an opportunity to lease out, or there was some disaster and something emptied out completely, and they're facing a circumstance that isn't normal for something that's already achieved stabilization.
Got it.
Thank you.
Um,
Ms. Cook, I'm sorry, Councilor Bach, I just want to be mindful of time. You want to ask one more question and then we're going to move on to the next panel.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to say about this, what I think is important is, I think as we think about coming back from the recovery, we're going to want to find ways to incentivize exactly what Sheena described, right? Like actually locating, especially our, like, you know, our neighborhood businesses, our Black and brown owned, women owned businesses in these like commercial vacancies, including right downtown and neighborhoods I represent. And it feels like the tricky thing about all of the economic development stuff is you want to incentivize behavior that wouldn't happen otherwise. You don't want to just give money to people for things that they were going to do anyways. And so the question of like, how do you establish a baseline of like something that's actually been vacant, been meaningfully vacant, right? And then like, you know, the city is helping to support them moving one of these clients in. I think we need to think really carefully about what data we have that could help us set up a responsible program on that front. And I also just really want to underline what Sheena said. I mean, I think there's a couple of limitations with the current Main Streets program. One of them is the neighborhoods that aren't represented. And I represent a bunch of neighborhoods that don't have Main Streets. And frankly, like I really saw it in the pandemic, like Mission Hill, if one of their restaurants was having a problem, I immediately heard about it through the Main Streets director. Fenway, it would take weeks longer for things to trickle up because there was nobody walking the street being like, how are you guys all doing? And I think that makes a real difference. And I'm glad we're looking at that. But I also think this question of the one thing about Main Streets is they're location based. So the question of like, how do you move something across? Like, I bet a lot of folks have read in the Globe, right, about Bintamani and them like, you know, losing their spot in Roxbury South End and going, this is this West African restaurant, right, getting snapped up to Providence downtown. Like, we need a mechanism where Boston downtown is saying, oh, you're losing your lease in the neighborhood. Like, wouldn't it be great to have you here? Mm-hmm. And because we're in these location-based system, like that kind of cross-cutting isn't happening. And so I just really want to raise that. And Councilor Mejia, if I can just put a question on the record, because I know we're time, but like, you know, for Natalia, I do really want to know a little bit more, and it might be an info request reply afterwards about the small business relief fund. I think it's awesome that $3.5 million we got out. I certainly heard both from people who were thrilled to get it and from people who didn't get those funds because like, it seemed like sort of there were various time cutoffs, their landlords hadn't gotten back to you guys in time, et cetera. And so I'm trying to understand, like, you know, is there a second round? Did we like meet, like you sort of gave us the numbers that we met, but like, did we meet the request of like everyone who qualified, or is there a pool of people? No, it looks like no, right? So I'm curious for your context with the D&D rental relief fund. The council's had a series of hearings and seen that go through a series of iterations and like heard about what you've learned in that process and how you would update it. And I think we probably need to have like a similar conversation about the small business one, because I would love to be able to tell people, oh, there's like a decent chance with this federal funding that there'll be an opportunity for some more of that. And also to know how you guys are sort of streamlining it for the second round. So I recognize that's not technically the topic of this hearing today, and you brought it up at the end. And so I don't want to derail, but I also just really want to put that interest on the record here.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councilor Bach. I do appreciate all the insight you always bring to our hearings. And I think that it's really important for us to recognize that we are trying to make data-informed decisions and we don't have all the data to work with. So I think I really do underscore the importance of kind of like rethinking who we're asking and how we go about getting that information so that we can have a better sense. And I also think just as it's equally as important for us to really think about what these incentives look like, because if our goal is to close the wealth gap, then we need to figure out the role that the city can play in helping to support that in a way that doesn't also put the commercial developers I think that there's ways for us to do this, and that's a win-win. And if anyone knows anything about me, I'm always trying to figure out what is the common ground here and how can we get to a place that everybody feels like they're contributing. This, in terms of community benefits, I think that it needs to go beyond just scholarships in our community. I think that we need to be really intentional about where we're going to put our money and how we're going to support these small businesses and these entrepreneurs really incubate. And I think COVID has presented itself as an opportunity to think outside the box and to be innovative, right? And to remove all of the barriers and the bureaucracy that oftentimes prevent folks from being able to thrive. I do have one question from the social media that I wanted to bring into the space, and then I'm going to go to Councilor Breeden. This is from Adam. He's the concierge Boston. That's his handle on Twitter. He would like to know, what can the city do to help restaurants affected by landlords who refuse to negotiate better terms on rents? We've lost too many restaurants around the city due to this. And so basically this goes back to the point that Councilor Bach was making about this restaurant that went all the way to Providence downtown, when we could have probably potentially supported them here, right, in downtown Boston. I'm just curious about what is the city doing to better negotiate with landlords around helping to support some of these restaurants here in the city of Boston?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I urge any restaurant that's, dealing with a tough landlord to reach out to us. We can offer free lease negotiation support. Again, the city doesn't have a lot of tools in place to be able to, come down on landlords who don't want to negotiate a lease. Again, that is a private contract. I do want to say that with this commercial rent relief fund that we were able to execute, there was a piece of this that held landlords accountable for receiving these funds as a condition of helping to keep businesses in place, and a lot of restaurants were able to participate in that. And I do want to say that there are a lot of great landlords out there who have been very generous and very thoughtful during COVID-19 and have worked with businesses. So I just urge anyone who needs support, any small business needing support, you don't have to be a restaurant, anyone, please reach out to us at smallbiz@boston.gov. We would be delighted to help and try to figure out what we can do. Every single business is different, so everybody's needs are different. So we need to do that one-on-one support with businesses. So I just urge people to reach out to us at smallbiz@boston.gov.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Councilor Breeden. I know she's been incredibly patient. So Councilor Breeden, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Thank you, Natalia, for a really great presentation. Would you please send over the deck? I'd like to study it in more depth, especially in relation to which neighbourhoods got the relief funds and how that worked out. One concern I have is that when an area is being redeveloped, that we see a lot of displacement of small business. And one thing we advocate for, maybe not that successfully, is that when developers come in, that they do recognize, just as we need affordable housing, that we also need affordable retail space as well. So I don't know what your office is doing in that space, or if it's something we should be more aggressive with.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Breeden. I think, so there isn't a lot of there's not a lot of formalities there around, either pairing up those spaces in new development. But we have started working with the BPDA on doing some early conversations with developers about those retail spaces, about what type of business they're looking to put in there. How do we help connect them to some businesses who are ready or, able to grow or expand their business into new space. I want to just be, mindful of the fact that our job is to make those introductions. Again, we can't really do a lot around securing, a business in a space. All we can do is help prepare that business for that application, and we've actually been able to do that in several spaces in partnership with some of the developers across the city, where they say to us, "Hey, we're looking for a X type of business. Here's the price point. Can you help us connect to businesses?" And we've been able to do that more, like I said, more informally, because there is no actual legal way for us to build that partnership. All we can do is make those introductions. I think around affordability, I think this is a bigger conversation that we have started to have, and with Chief Dillon and D&D, with the BPDA around affordability, but there are trade-offs there, right? So in order to have more affordable retail, we need to think about the affordability of the entire development project, and whether or not that is something that the community is willing to work with us on, because I think we don't want to take away affordability from residential space in order to give space for affordability at the retail level. I think a lot of that does happen to come down on the landlord or the property owner around getting good tenants into those spaces and what that might look like. But we are thinking creatively. Again, this is more on a policy level, and I think a project by project level, to identify ways in which we can make affordability of retail spaces more accessible.
Very good. Thank you. Madam Chair, I unfortunately I have to jump off. I will review the tape and thank everyone. And I look forward to getting the slide deck and perhaps having a further conversation with you very soon.
I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to do that. And Councilor Breeden, just so you know, you do have, I know that the PowerPoint was shared with everyone earlier today.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Councilor Mejia.
No, thank you so much, Councilor Breeden. Sorry that we took a little while to get to you. I'm going to now move on to the our activists and our community voices. I mixed it up a little bit, so we had some community voices in the front part, and now we're going to move over to our second panelist. I'm really going to encourage all of us to really keep our comments to 5 minutes, reminding myself of that as well. So I'm going to start off with Darrell Weathers and Jacob from Voices of Liberation, who, as you all know, I mentioned in my opening remarks, were the leading force behind all of this effort here. And so just wanted to make sure that they were both on camera and ready to go, because in many ways you brought us here. So thank you. And like just the lighting on your background, let's make sure that, we could see you good. So do something with the backdrop, with the light coming in from that window, just so,
I got you.
because we need you all to be seen and heard, right? There we go.
All right. How's that? Hello, everyone. My name is Darrell Weathers. I'm a Black man from Boston. I'm born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. Today, I'm fighting for a policy that could possibly change the democracy in the third most gentrified city in America. Being a Black man in Boston, I know how it feels to work a full-time job and still be homeless. Never mind renting a $40,000 box for a commercial space. The idea that we wanted to talk to you guys about and wanted to share with you all is a commercial vacancy text, which we all talking about. And I'm gonna swing that over to my brother Jake, who can go more in depth.
So thank you all for joining us. We are continuing this conversation. Some of you were able to join us in November of last year for the Housing Policy Summit, the Equity Summit. Shout out to Councilor Bach, all the other folks who was there. And so basically we're continuing on that mission. And so that all came out of a conversation that we started around basically vacant units and filling vacancies in our neighborhood. This conversation was started before COVID, and while COVID has, I think, in a lot of ways shed light on, pre-existing inequalities and divisions in our community, I think in a lot of ways, this problem will still be here when COVID is gone, unless we, undertake drastic systemic change to the way we approach it. So, I'm also a lifelong Bostonian, born and raised in Jamaica Plain, and where we kind of got the spark to take this issue on was initially as residents, business owners, and community organizers looking to have a space in our community to do stuff. Similar to Sheena, who spoke earlier, we've been working for many, many years. We have a business that's just passed its 10-year mark. We have a nonprofit organization that a community organization we've been doing since high school. And so basically, we've had work to do, but never a place to do it in our community. And that was something that we could see for many others beyond ourselves. And then at the same time, walking up and down my main streets in JP, we can see vacant units that have been vacant for 10, 12 years, where we know the landlord kicked them out, raised the rent, and has been sitting there waiting for somebody to pay a higher rent ever since. And we've spoken to them, as, hey, we live in this neighborhood, we're trying to access this space, and met a lot of those roadblocks and barriers because, quite frankly, what Kenzie Block was talking about, there's a lack of incentives for property owners, for some property owners at least, to fill their spaces. So there are some landlords who are able to sit on a place and say, I'm not going to collect $8,000 a month. I'm just going to ask for it. And that financially serves their business. And what that means for the community is there's 3,000 square feet of prime real estate that just sits there for year after year after year. And what we need to do is not only, I think, incentivize what getting people in there, what we've all been talking about in terms of filling those spaces with community members, with businesses led by women, with businesses led by immigrants, with businesses led by people of color, by businesses led by people from the neighborhood. Not only saying, hey, if you do that, we have something for you, but also having perhaps some sort of disincentivization or some sort of reason why it wouldn't make business sense to sit there and let it sit empty. And I think one of the ways that we proposed doing that was a vacancy tax or some other mechanism that says, hey, you landlord have determined that you would rather let it sit here than charge a lower price or make it affordable to the community. That's your decision, it's your property. But since you're trying to own it here in the community, there needs to be some sort of measure and some sort of toll for the impact that has on the community. So if you choose to leave it empty and vacant, we need some sort of offset that we can use to invest in other spaces that the city can maintain as open and available to people in the community affordably. And then you can have your storefront sit empty if that's what you want to do. Or you could also rent it out at a lower rate that somebody from the neighborhood could afford, get somebody in there, avoid that penalty, and maybe also incur the benefit. So I think that's the overall idea. And we had that idea more broadly for all forms of property. We're having this community conversation today around commercial vacancies, particularly because we recognize that it's easier to sort of tackle them one by one, and also that they're sort of separate in the way that they work and function. And so, just to kind of bring it all back, I appreciate, Natalia, the work you did trying to collect the data. We've been looking at this as well. That's one of the main sources of issue is how do you even know how to qualify or quantify it? But as somebody who lives in the neighborhood, Jamaica Plain, 2% feels like a lot. 2% walking down the main street feels like a lot. And especially as someone who's tried to open a store, it felt like, man, there's nowhere to go for us. We fortunately just got into a space, but I think we got into the only space on Center Street that wasn't $5,000 a month. You know what I mean? And I think that's a problem. That's something we need to address. So one idea for data collection and one idea for enforcement is the city has a lot of power in terms of when people register, like a commercial property, when they file for occupancy permits, when they file for, letting the city know that they're there. I think that's an opportunity where we could check in on an annual basis and say, hey, is this vacant? And ask them. And again, we're relying on some self-reporting there, but it could set a baseline. And on the flip side, when it comes to figuring out how to actually, get people to, contribute to this offset, or to follow the program, or to be encouraged to lower their rent, I think one of the ways that we could enforce that on the city side is look at the power we have to withhold occupancy permits or building permits for people who don't comply with the vacancy tax or the vacancy offset, or whatever we need to call it. So that's our idea in a nutshell. We brought this forward as community folks who just wanted to see it happen. And then this conversation, was the logical next step. So I'm sure you'll have received some written testimony as well from folks from the community. And I'd like to turn it back over to Darrell to just really speak from that perspective of my neighbor and my brother who's been helping bring this issue to all of your attention.
Thank you, President. I just want to say and keep it short, sweet, and simple. I really just think Boston has been capitalistic forever, and obviously we need to change this. And this right here is a good start. In other countries, this has been utilized. It has a track record of ensuring the people. So let's ensure our people today. Everybody who's watching here, who has some type of chance to change this democracy, I'm close to the pain of the people, of Black and brown people. And we need to change this. And single household, the mothers, everybody needs a chance, you know what I'm saying? And this is the start to changing more corruption too. Because if people own businesses outside of just in these neighborhoods where they're not making money, I mean, it changes the dynamic of the people. So please be mindful and know that this is very, very serious, because vacancy is not a game and it's been going on way too long. That's it. That's like I said.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think I met you all alongside when I had an office in Jamaica Plain. And our office, we opened up the doors literally to the people. We created an opportunity for artists to showcase their artwork on our walls. We hosted album release parties for young people who were dropping their albums. We actually opened up our office to work in collaboration with nonprofits that wanted to host retreats. And when they talk about workspace shares, like those workspaces, we called it Hoodworks, because we created space for small businesses to even host meetings in our office, right? So our campaign office became a hub of community. And we were also very super mindful of the fact that if we could do something like this in terms of just opening up our space, what a gift would it be for a lot of these empty storefronts to do the same, to open up their spaces, to allow people to incubate their businesses. I think it'll be a win-win for our entire community to have space to be able to incubate, and these small businesses to be able to grow, and the folks who own these spaces, they can still get some revenue, right? I just think that incentive in terms of doing business in our community has to just be more than just having a storefront in our community. You have to do business with the people, and doing business with the people is really about creating space for the people to build alongside you as well. So I think it's both an opportunity and a responsibility for us to really lean into this work and figure out what we can do as a collective. And I'm curious, Darrell and Jacob, to get your thoughts on some of the proposals we've heard from other counselors around how to collect data and other ideas. I'm wondering, I know you all have done a lot of work. We worked together on the Housing Policy Summit, and you brought in all of the right voices into that space. So I'm sure you've been giving this a lot of thought, but curious about any other ideas or comments that you have around data collection.
Oh, I love the idea of looking at point of sale data collection, also looking at, so this was more so on the, again, if we can leverage publicly available realty stuff. So a lot of the data sets around what units are on the market and just seeing how long something has been on the market. I think there's some data around that could be leveraged. I recognize that, yeah, the self-reporting aspect of it is challenging. And and also the less than 50 state employees is challenging. I think that might be something worth reconsidering, is how we define a small business or how we define what's worth tracking. And again, if the state isn't doing it, what tools do we have at our disposal for when we engage with folks to potentially try to gather that information. And then lastly, looking at all my notes here, that the backwards looking data from the assessment, like that essentially understanding that while that data isn't necessarily going to be useful in the present, that how can we use that to look at longer trends? You know what I mean? And I think if we dig deep on some of these things, especially looking at what really is affordable, what things really have been going for, and then looking at what's actually available, I think perhaps some sort of a case study on, we're not necessarily a bad example because we've had a business for, just under 10 years. And it took us that long to get our first storefront. And that's what we're about to try to open, and looking at, what, we all have jobs, we all work hard, but the level of resources that it takes to start a business in Boston, I think looking at what that means and then saying, okay, how many of these spaces were actually affordable, or was it only affordable to, somebody who could come here and start a Jamba Juice or whatever.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna, Priya, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just get the name of Jake? Can I just get the name of your business, Yundarel?
Yeah, that's Scope Apparel LLC.
Thank you.
And I know, Priya, you are also here with us today, and I wanted to just make sure as we continue with the lines of our community voices that you get to speak. Priya Lane is the director of BizGrow at LCR, and would love to open up the floor.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. My name is Priya Lane. I direct our BizGrow project at Lawyers for Civil Rights. At BizGrow, we provide free legal assistance, technical support, and business support to minority, immigrant, and women-owned small businesses. Growing wealth in historically disadvantaged communities have always been an important part of the civil rights movement. And for 20 years, this year, we've been helping to close that wealth gap by fueling equitable economic growth for small businesses. And we do that through free legal representation, technical assistance, and legal workshops. So every day we're working with small businesses who are really struggling to find and maintain commercial space in the city. These small businesses will work for years, as Jake mentioned, to get to the place where they're ready to open a brick and mortar, and then will look and find no available spaces in their communities. And so often it's an issue where there is no option in their price range. And as we all know, it's not easy to get a small business loan, and that's getting harder every day. And so they'll either be forced to abandon their dream of opening a brick and mortar in their own community and stay virtual, or have to shift their business model away from that, or force them to move out of Boston into the suburbs, forcing them to open their small business outside of their own community, which is, never what they wanted. And so, really think that using the, sort of a devastating outcome of the pandemic and twisting that as an opportunity to really rethink the way that we are using commercial space in the city, and really trying to make it more equitable by providing more space for small minority, immigrant, and women-owned businesses. And we would love to work with the city and support any actions that the city would take to make this process a more level playing field.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm curious, I know, I believe we still have Councillor Bach on the line. Wanted to know if you had any immediate questions for Darrell, Jacob, or Priya.
Yeah, thank you so much, Councilor Mejia, and thank you to all three of you for speaking before us, and frankly, all the work that you're doing on this issue already. You really are experts as well. I guess I have a question. It's sort of for the whole, I'm grateful to the administration panel for still being here because it's kind of about what they've been saying and sort of reflecting it back to you all. I mean, like the thing that I hear Jake and Darrell describing, it's something that frustrates me and that I hear frustrating residents around the city all the time, which is people can't understand how it could be economical for people to keep these spaces vacant for 10, 15 years. I mean, or 5, right? It's just, it seems crazy. And based on, and I still feel like I don't really understand it, but digging into it a little bit, it seems like a thing that gets worse the more our property is owned by a small group of large property holders. Because if I'm like one person who owns one building and I leave it vacant, like because I'm chasing a higher rent, like over time I'm losing a lot of money. But if I own a whole portfolio, and for instance, like on Newbury Street, which we talk about all the time, is a great economic destination, and we really want to make sure it comes back after the pandemic in a big way, but which frankly has a crazy number of vacancies. Part of what's going on is that we've got owners who own a lot of portfolio on the street. And so they're thinking about, oh, if I set this lease too low, it'll affect what I can get on all the other leases on the street. And so they're willing to have that building sit empty in order to help drive up the rest of their portfolio. If it was the only building they owned, that would be much harder to do. And I guess I'm worried about a dynamic where property ownership in general in the city gets driven more and more to these like large investors. And that after the pandemic, we see the folks who are deep pocketed scoop up the desirable locations. And so I just, I want to strongly agree with Jake and Darrell that we have to think about what are the incentives and disincentives that we have currently, and like how do we fundamentally shift that structure. And I'm curious whether on the city side, assessing has a lot of insight into what the market actually looks like because of all the information you collect. And in terms of economic development, like those conversations that you make happen, Natalia, like what seems to actually move the needle with getting landlords to decide that it's in their interest to do these below market leases? And are there any of the things, I know you can't sort of commit the administration today on these things, but are there any of the things that you're hearing folks say that seem like directions that if we actually went, it would change their calculation? Because we've got to do something. I think otherwise we're just going to end up more and more living in the town of like a small handful of major commercial landlords. And that'll be good for chains and terrible for local businesses. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you understand their calculations to operate here, because it doesn't make any sense to the average citizen why they sit vacant on our main streets.
It doesn't always make sense to us either, Counselor. So I do want to say that I think that there's a variety, again, like every space is very unique and there's a variety of reasons why a space might be vacant. I know that, for example, there's a space in Center Street that at one point was a hair salon, a lot of water damage to the floor, small time property owner, don't have a lot of liquid cash to then be able to invest in their space. So they're waiting for a high rent business to then potentially be able to, use that money to reinvest in the floor to then be able to actually have someone in there. So I think there's property issues for a lot of landlords, especially those small landlords that don't have a lot of liquid cash and don't have those large portfolios, that I think we have been trying to think about creative solutions around, because that's not always something that we know until somebody brings it up and we can engage with that landlord. I do want to say that for the first time, our office, due to the pandemic and due to this commercial rent relief fund, we actually have access to landlords for the first time in ways that we didn't before. Both for the main streets, they now have access to them because they've worked with them throughout the pandemic. And for us, just collecting data and having be able to, for us to be able to contact them and ask them questions and engage them. So I'm thrilled about kind of moving this conversation forward. I can't speak to why, landlords wouldn't be willing to rent out a space, an individual space, a specific space to, an up and coming business at a lower rent. I can't speak to that. But I do want to reemphasize that, over the last 2 years, my team has been working with businesses individually again to try to get them prepared for those spaces, and making some of those introductions. And it is by no means, like I said, it's by no means an official program. We're using existing programming to help kind of frame that. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue that in the future. I'm also, again, not to commit the city on this, but one of the ways in which we're hoping to be able to be more helpful is to expand our existing funding sources to include kind of some of those repairs to engage landlords in that process. Our funding is federal funding, so there's a lot of requirements around actually being able to use those dollars in those ways, but we are looking into that. And again, if there's additional funding available, that is usually what can help businesses get started. Some of the vacancies are around change of use, right? So if you want a restaurant in a space that was previously, a salon, you're going to have to do a lot of work and a lot of investment, and that usually comes from the business owner side, that they have to actually pay for a lot of those capital investments in order to convert a space into that. So there's a lot of elements there, Counselor, and I'm looking forward to working with this group on identifying some real policy and programmatic solutions.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up question to Councilor Box. And I just kind of want to just put it out there that we know, I'm just curious in terms of the data that we're collecting, just to see how vacant storefronts also impact the income for other businesses, right? Like when we have neighborhoods that look distressed, when we have neighborhoods that don't look vibrant, that also impacts the financial success of our neighboring businesses, right? So even from an accountability standpoint, in terms of data, if there's a way for us to really assess how these vacancies are impacting the overall general income wealth of other businesses, I think is something for us to consider in terms of another data point to look into. And then in terms of incentives, right? Like, I think that for me, when I think about this conversation, is about accountability, right? And it goes back to what Darrell and Jacob were talking about, is like the impact that these vacancies are having on our community. And if we can incentivize these commercial storefront owners to kind of put their money where their mouth is and pay up, I think that we could find ways to get them to want to be a better partner with the surrounding community. So just curious the work that the city can play in that. And I know that there are other cities across the country that have now, especially due to the pandemic, have been really creative about how do we utilize these empty storefronts to help not only just boost the economy, but to also help support smaller businesses. And I'm just really looking forward to moving the conversation beyond the conversation. Like, this public hearing has given us some really great nuggets to really think about in terms of what we can do differently. I think that there is an appetite here to move beyond the conversation and come with some really specific, here's 3 things that we can commit to, or at least start exploring and come out with a dashboard of ways that we can hold ourselves accountable. I also think that Sheena texted me before she left, and I wanted to just make sure that I bring this into the conversation while I still have you all here. She basically said to Councilor Bach's comments and her own feelings about it for years is, how do we reimagine the whole Main Street's infrastructure, because it is not working for everybody. Then there's also the piece around, can there be the incentives for business owners and landlords who want to let us know about the vacancies? Like, is there a way, maybe if you're not able to get that data, is there a way to incentivize people to provide you the data that you need so that we can have a better, accurate account? And the validation formula that you shared, does that help small businesses, or does it create more inequity? I guess there was the violation formula that you mentioned earlier. Do you know if it helps small businesses or if it creates more inequities? The formula that you mentioned earlier.
To be fair, I'm not quite sure what formula I mentioned. So I don't really know a good way to answer that question. I would love to answer it, but I'm not quite sure what the question is talking about. Sorry.
So I just want to reemphasize, obviously, Nick's team doesn't work directly with small businesses often, unless that small business actually owns that property. So there may be a disconnect there.
Okay.
And just to touch on the point about main streets, I urge everyone here and anyone listening at home to get involved in the Reimagine Boston Main Streets program. We've actually been working to engage community members, business owners in thinking about the actual structure, the framework and the existing program of Main Streets. So that is happening right now. You can go to boston.gov/reimagine-Main Streets and get that information. Main-Streets to get the information about that program. We do need all the business owners and community voices at those conversations, because that is literally what we're doing right now.
Excellent, thank you. So Priya, I wanted to just ask, wanted to get your thoughts on some of the proposals that we've heard, and we've also seen the office space vacancy rates skyrocket since the start of COVID, and would like to, what would you like the city to do to help fill these vacancies by local small startups?
Yeah, thank you. So I liked a lot of the ideas that we've had here. The vacancy tax, I think, is especially one that is interesting and can go a long way to sort of change that cost benefit analysis that a lot of the landlords are going through when they decide that it's okay to just keep these, spots vacant. We're seeing a lot of small businesses struggling because they can't negotiate with their landlords now. There's no longer any moratorium on commercial evictions. And so landlords are moving quickly to evict because they have that tool in their arsenal again. And it hurts sort of the negotiation process on both sides. I commend Natalia and her team for everything they've been doing to help small businesses negotiate with landlords. And, we know that it's a private contract and that puts a lot of restrictions on what the city can't and can do. But anything that can go towards putting more of the power on the side of the small business and less of the power on the side of the landlord. We saw during the moratorium on commercial evictions that our small businesses suddenly had a little bit more negotiating power, and it made it a much more equitable conversation. And so, anything that can level that playing field a little bit that the city can do should, help to kind of make it an easier process for them.
Thank you for that. Natalia?
Yeah, I just want to respond. So I think almost immediately when the pandemic hit and the eviction moratorium was put on residential properties, our team worked really closely with the state on making sure that the governor extended that to commercial vacancies. So it was definitely something that's been on our mind for a long, long time, even prior to obviously the pandemic, but more immediately during the pandemic. I think as far as vacancy tax, it is something that we're talking about on a policy level. Again, there's a vast difference and vast different impact on small-time property owners, which we know are a lot of the folks in our neighborhoods are small-time landlords who maybe have one or two properties. Maybe they own one building with four, commercial properties. And those folks are really usually connected with us and willing to work with us versus kind of those larger property owners where a property tax might not be incentive enough. So we don't want to disproportionately impact the small-time landlords that are doing the right thing by putting putting a tax, in place because they can't afford to fix up a space. So then they can't bring in someone because they can't pass inspection. Like there's a lot of underlying impacts of that. So we are thinking about that on a daily basis. We're trying to explore what those right levers are to pull in order to ensure that we are incentivizing having those properties filled. I also, want to reiterate how important it is for folks to be engaged in these processes as, new businesses are coming online and supporting them. And then just connecting with our office. We can't know what your issues are if we don't know what your issues are. So we can't help you through that if we don't know that you're there. So again, I just urge folks to reach out to our team, smallbiz@boston.gov. We work very closely with LCR, Priya. We've worked together a lot, and we send folks your way all the time because obviously capacity is limited, and so we work with a lot of local small business development organizations that want to support businesses. And so I just urge folks to get involved in the process and connect with us so that we know what's going on with your particular property and we can figure out how to best help you.
Nick, I'm curious, since you've been on and Natalia quickly let us know what you may or may not be able to kind of really lean into, but from a property tax and an assessment standpoint, what are some of the things that you have seen other cities do to address this issue, and where do you think, in terms of a best practice, we should be leaning in a little bit more into?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I haven't had an opportunity to really look at what other vacancy taxes or concepts like that other communities have used. That's definitely something that we can take a look at and see if there's assistance for. To kind of follow up on the point that Natalia was making, taxes, it's very interesting and it's worth taking a look, but taxes are kind of a very blunt tool, and it can be really easy to accidentally catch and hurt people that we don't want to hurt when we're doing something like a vacancy tax. So, for example, if you had a vacancy tax based on the percentage of space in a building, if you have someone that owns a huge building that's 100,000 square feet, just for an example, they could have 1,000 square feet that's vacant, and that would be like all right, 1% of the building's vacant. Then you could have a small building that's just 1,000 square feet with 1,000 square feet vacant, and that would be 100% of the building is vacant. And that small business owner or that small property owner is probably in a worse position in general in life than the person that owns the 100,000 square foot building. And so we wouldn't want to crafting a vacancy tax in the right way to make sure that we're getting at this long-term vacancy concept is an important thing to think about. I think one of the more nuanced tools that we have is kind of providing support to the work that Natalia's group does, because it's really targeted, and it's targeted to help the actual end business and the end occupants, whereas property taxes and taxes on ownership aren't helping the businesses, they're helping or penalizing the landlords. And so that ends up being a little bit tricky, but it's really interesting to think about and figure out if there are things that we can do to kind of get at these problems.
Yeah, I would think so, Nick. And I think that because if we're doing this with a racial equity lens, I think that we could be really intentional about what that looks like, so there won't be those unintended consequences, right? So I think being proactive and thinking about the number of, I would say, their profits, right? I would look at that. I would probably look at the years of business. I would also I would look at the whole entire portfolio and look at the makeup of this, the owner, and make decisions, and then create like a formula of how we could lead with this with a racial equity lens, to ensure that those who have the most, we're doing this in a way that's the most fairest, right? And I think that we can be creative and get ahead of that if we're intentional about leading with equity.
No, I think you're right, Counselor. And I think one of the things that's kind of been brought up that is something that Natalia's group works on, and something that Ms. Lane's business works on, is things like figuring out a way to provide legal assistance, provide negotiation help to small businesses to kind of get the landlord to the table with them. Because I think the answer to a lot of these questions, and Councillor Bach had a very good question earlier about, it doesn't seem to make economic sense as to why landlords would intentionally keep their space vacant. And the reality is it does not make economic sense. I think that sometimes people just make kind of bad economic decisions, and they think that there's this opportunity cost where, like, oh, I'm scared if I take this person that isn't going to pay me the amount of money that I think I can get, I'm gonna miss out on the next person, and the next person's gonna pay me a lot more. So I'm just gonna wait until the next person comes along. And then they spend years and years with their building vacant, and they keep waiting, and they are not making a good decision when they do that. And if we can provide assistance through like the work that Natalia's group does to help get those conversations started, to help small businesses negotiate with those landlords, to explain why it's better for them to have that small business now and to have that space filled, then that's how we're going to kind of drive and solve this problem. And so I think that probably the opportunity there is a little bit more of something that's driven by funding and grants and the city spending money that way, as opposed to, tax assistance or kind of, sometimes the punishment tool works and sometimes it doesn't. But we know that the providing assistance tool does work.
Yep.
And hopefully there'll be some opportunities that are going to come up thanks to the new federal funding stimulus money to kind of help us direct some aid to pull us a little bit out of this problem. And it has definitely been an ongoing problem, even though the pandemic might have made it worse, but it was a problem before the pandemic. It will be a problem after the pandemic. And it's something that we should definitely focus on to try and keep the diversity in our neighborhoods that we all actually like and enjoy and make our city a better place.
Thank you. And I think Jake, Jake and Darrell and Priya, do you guys, anything you want to add?
Yeah, we would love to just jump in real quick. Appreciate Nick and Natalia, what everybody's feedback is. And I think that was one of our main goals with starting this conversation was, especially the word tax and the concept of a tax, it definitely can come off as, a blunt or off-putting or unbusiness friendly mechanism. And, I think, but once again, it goes back to what we were talking about and, Councillor Bach echoed about what are the proper balance of incentives and disincentives and making sure that it, like you said, makes business sense. And so again, I also I do appreciate that there is like a lack of education. Natalia, we didn't know about your office, you know what I mean, until we had this conversation. And I think that's an area where there's opportunity for the great work that you guys do to be highlighted and brought to more folks, and also for that to be more intentionally brought to the folks who need it or have not been receiving that word. But on the flip side, while I'd like to think that all options should be on the table, and when we're thinking about why something wouldn't work, we think about how that could strengthen what we're trying to do. So if we're looking at, all right, we don't want to have this negative impact by accident on the unintended small property owners, that's part of the conversation that we were starting. And that's part of, I think, the really important work of figuring out how to, like Julia said, come up with the right formula that says, who are we talking to and what are we trying to get them to do? And lastly, while I do think there is opportunity for education and for folks to be like, oh, wow, great. I didn't know that having a small business in my store would be the economically sensible thing to do. I didn't know small businesses were great tenants and responsible. Thanks for teaching me, City of Boston. I think that's a great approach, but I also think that there are some, especially in that larger category of landowner who have multiple blocks of properties, I think that they're a little bit past that message. And I think they might not be moved to do this out of the goodness of their hearts or the economic sense that we all think it makes for them. I think we might have to consider some other measure to get them to, again, offset the impact that they're having by saying, I want to own half of Newberry Street and charge this much, or whatever, half of Jamaica Plain, etc. So that thank you all really for, I think this is about how we get the best ideas forward. And then I know Darrell wanted to say something, so I'm gonna stop.
It's okay. I just wanted to say, you know, I'm angry because, you know, Boston has showed some serious capitalistic ways. And I mean by that, it's just like you'll leave something vacant from 2011 all the way till 2020. It's not just happening now. It's been happening. It was already a crisis before the pandemic. Only thing I can say is like, I really would like everybody just to like understand that if we could write this out the right way and we could figure it out for also the small business owners, that's great. But also, you know, we have to make some type of some punitive financial measure towards getting something towards these large developers and all these people who's coming into this city and just taking us out. We have to define ourselves and we have to do better. This is serious. This is not something that's going to be if we don't change it now, we could be running into a real serious problem within the next 5 to 10 years. It's worse than it already is.
Real fact. Priya.
Nothing more to add. I agree with everything that was just said. Thank you so much, Counselor, for convening us and having this important conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. I also just wanted to give a shout out to the administration for really leaning into this conversation and really recognizing that this is it's all of us. It's going to take all of us to get there, right? And I think that the only way we do that is if we are able to have open dialogue. And I think the best thinking comes from everyone who's in the space. And so I'm really encouraged about what is possible and that there is an appetite to really kind of close that wealth gap, right? And to do so in a way that feels right for everybody, which we know not everyone's going to be happy, but at the very least, we're going to get people to where they need to be so that everyone feels heard, right? So just wanted to thank the administration for really showing up and leaning in, and to Darrell and Jake and Priya and our community panel for joining us today. I think that, again, this is what it looks like when we create community-centered approaches to the problems that we've been contending with. And I think this is what partnership is all about. And I'm really incredibly grateful to both Jake and Darrell for the steadfast conviction in this space and bringing us here together. So thank you to you both for joining us and for leading this conversation. Thank you, because this is what it looks like. And Natalia and Nick, thank you for joining us as well. I would like to have anyone any closing comments, because I'm gonna be ready to gavel us out in a minute. Now we're good.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all your time and your love and your attention. We appreciate you hearing us and your ideas as well. Thank you, Counselor, for convening us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Let's create a new democracy, please, from this day forward. Let's go. Come on.
That's right. So with that said, I'm calling this hearing to an end and gaveling us out officially. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye, y'all. Thank you. We didn't have any more we didn't have any public testimonies. That's why I gavelled us out. Thank you so very much. Bye.
Thank you, Counselor.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.